Hello and welcome to Chat UTD. Let's catch up on all things United. As always, it's been confirmed today that Sir Alex Ferguson will, at the end of the season, leave his formal ambassadorial I can't say that word, ambassador role at the club. It will no longer be a paid role, although by all accounts he's welcome to stay on in that non-executive director capacity and still go to games and still, I suppose, be semi-involved. Makes a lot of sense to me. It's probably an indulgence to pay someone a salary who, when you weigh up what he actually does at the club, not what he's done for the club, that's quite different. What he does for the club now, what's that worth? What's that worth to the club? And they've got to weigh stuff like that up. So I get that. I mean, what does he do? I don't know. Is he a bit of a go-between sometimes? Does he schmooze people to try and soften them up to get them to come to United? If he does, I'm sure he takes a lot of pleasure out of that anyway, and I'm sure he would do that anyway, regardless of a paid role or a formal role. I think back to Busby and when he retired as a manager, I know he was heavily involved for probably about 10 years. I think he called the shots. He appointed managers. He was a big voice in sacking managers. I know certainly with Doherty, he had a big part to play in Doherty being sacked. He pretty much ran the club really, in the capacity he was in as club president. I think at the time he was a director and then club president. But if you look at the way Busby lived his life, and towards the end of his life, he wasn't living in the lap of luxury. I'm sure he wasn't being paid a handsome figure by the club, but he was involved because he was Sir Matt Busby. But it was in that ambassador kind of role. And the class of '92 will tell you, Busby had an office at Old Trafford, and you'd know he was there because you could smell his pipe and things like that. But I don't think he'd be being paid any money, or if he was, I'm sure it was a nominal kind of fee. By all accounts, the money that the club's been paying Sir Alex is quite significant. So I hope he retains a place at the club, because he is, of course, he's our knight, isn't he? He's our he's our modern day Busby, really, and he deserves anything and everything he wants at United. But paying him a handsome salary in the modern climate that we're in maybe doesn't make too much sense. I do want to compare that and another cost cutting exercise that INEOS have done, though, with perhaps more quick wins that they could be getting. But first of all, let's look at something else they've done, which is they've cut 250 members of staff, which they're saying is saving them £10 million a year. On average, then, those members of staff must have been on 40k a year. I'm not sure about that, because the type of jobs we're talking about, I'm not sure you'd be getting 40 grand a year for them. Or maybe some jobs you were 60 and some were 20, and roughly somewhere in the middle is 40. But I worked it out: 250 staff, 10 million quid. It averages out at 40k a year. So they're saving themselves £10 million. That's okay. Again, maybe perhaps there's more efficient ways to use your staff. Perhaps we could streamline the staff as they have done and still get the same results. If you can, then obviously that makes sense. But you have to then look at the easier wins, which are things like Marcus Rashford's on £15.6 million a year. Casemiro's not far off that as well. So there's £30 million a year on two players in their wages. And what are they bringing to the club? Are they worth that? You're happy to cut Sir Alex's salary because it saves a few quid. It's about 2 million quid. I don't know. Not sure what it would be. Makes sense because he's not giving you anything really. You believe anyway. You're not giving you anything back for it. Well, what's Rashford giving you back for £15.6 million? What's Casemiro giving you back for similar amounts of money? What's the return from them? Casemiro doesn't really play. Rashford, I would argue, you could replace with a functional £15 million winger who probably would have the same goals and assists as him and would be on a third of his wage, maybe even less than that. So if you're going to cut costs with the little guys, like the 250 staff who, they've got families, they're people who, this is real stuff for them. If you're going to do that, fine, but then be brave enough to do it with the big hitters as well, because they're the ones you could say £15.6 million if Marcus Rashford left Man United, compared to laying off 250 members of staff for £10 million saving. There's just something about that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest. I think there's a lack of reading of the room here from INEOS to some degree. You know, it's not ruthless just going round and telling the little man, sorry, what you're doing can be replaced by AI, or we can make it happen more efficiently. And then you're not prepared to do it with the big guns like Rashford and Casemiro. If you have to understand, if you're playing at a big club and you're supposed to be a top level football player and you demand the big wages, then part of that is you have to give a very strong return. You have to be the best. Neither of them are close to being the best. So if you're going to make a point and you're going to make a stand, do it with them as well. I was reading, it was just a mini story really from Shaquille O'Neal. It was on something like Facebook. It was anecdotal, talking about when he was a young basketball player, his stepdad was quite hard on him, and his stepdad had watched him in a game and said, looks like the pressure's getting to you. And Shaquille O'Neal was like, yeah, it is. And his stepdad said, you're weak. I'll show you what pressure is. And he took him to a really rough part of town where there was homeless people, and there was this guy, by all accounts, a homeless fella begging not for food and money, but begging for a job. And he had a family, he had kids, he had his wife, and they stopped and started talking to him. And Shaquille O'Neal's stepdad said, that's pressure. That's what pressure is, not what you're going through. Shaquille O'Neal, in the end of the story, to make himself look like a good guy, had got a house for this fella and got him and his family, and got a job for him. He got him employed somewhere, and there was a happy ending. But he said he never felt pressure on the basketball court again after that. I'm not sure that's true. I bet he still did, because pressure's all relative. But it does put into context. Pressure is the 250 staff who've got families to feed, who are on a living wage, and they're told you can't work here anymore. Hopefully they went on and got a job somewhere else. But having to go and get a job somewhere else, that's real pressure. You know, if Marcus Rashford leaves Man United, he'll go and get paid handsomely somewhere else. You know, read the room, INEOS, I'd say. Manchester at its heart is a working class community. And Man United, as big as it is as a football club, serves the community that it's a part of. Football is about community, about everybody. And you're happy to lay off 250 staff to save 10 million quid. Okay. Then you also have to be happy to say to a highly paid underperforming star, or not really a star, you're gonna have to improve, or you need to go. And I don't sense that that's what's happening here. You'd have to take a hit on Rashford transfer fee wise. You'd have to sell him for something less than what you think he's worth. But it's pure profit, because he's a youth academy product. And with Casemiro, you'd probably have to take a transfer fee far less than what you paid for him. But again, there's £30 million you're saving by getting rid of two underperforming, highly paid athletes. If you're prepared to go after the little guys, you've got to go after the big ones as well, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, you just look a bit like a bully, if I'm honest. Don't like using that word, but I think you do. In other stuff, not a lot going on, mainly like rumours really, but whenever our manager seems under a bit of pressure, Zidane's name seems to be brought into the mix, mainly because he's available. He's only been employed for 3 years of the last 10. So oftentimes with United, his job becomes available, Zidane's free. Zidane isn't going to come and manage Man United. It's just not going to happen. It's just a rumour mill that he's always a part of, and sure enough, it's a quiet week, so people will start mentioning his name. Zidane doesn't want to manage Man United. He can barely speak English. His reputation is amazing because he knows when to get out, and he did that at Real Madrid. His reputation is exclusively at Real Madrid. If we believe what we hear from people close to him, he would probably only go back into management to manage France. He's not going to come into our joke of a club. And this was brought up by Mark Goldbridge the other day, and it's an extension of the point on Zidane, but it's a separate point in itself. as Goldbridge said the other day, we've got a number of new players that have come in this summer who are all on obviously brand new contracts. Rashford and Bruno, you could certainly say at least one of them is an underperforming high profile player. You could probably say both, although I love Bruno. They're both on new contracts, which ties them to the club for the next 3-4 years, whatever it is. You've got players that have been here just for the Ten Hag era, who've been here 2-3 years now, but they're still on relatively new contracts. You've even got older players like Maguire. Maguire and Lindelof are probably two exceptions to the rule, so probably he's a bad example. Shaw probably is a better example. Shaw's not long since signed a contract. So even ones that have been here quite some time are on relatively fresh contracts. So there probably is. There's Maguire and Lindelof, I'd say, who probably are coming towards the end of their contracts. But what that really means is, whether we think these players are good enough or not, is we're stuck with them. Because they're all on watertight contracts that if they say they want to stay and they don't want to move somewhere else, then they're not going to have to, because they've got these amazing contracts. So it's really difficult for someone like Zidane to look at that team when he's used to what he had at Real Madrid and go, "Oh right, yeah, that looks an exciting proposition." It doesn't really. Two ways of looking at it. The squad has some promise about it. You can see there's the shape maybe of a decent skeleton bones of a decent team, maybe, with some players that are underperforming or maybe need to be better coached. You use a different shape, maybe that might bring something out of it. But by and large, with a couple of additions, it's not. This team isn't full of players who've got loads of managers sacked, as I spoke about on Saturday, but it is the team that finished 8th last season, and it is the team that lost 14 league games last season. So that's what we've got. And a big concern for me, just in terms of the squad in general, is how are we going to score goals this season? I know this isn't new news, but it's a massive concern. We can't seem to formulate a style of play where we can attack teams and create chances and score goals without leaking chances at the other end. But you look at how many goals we got in the league last season and how many goals we've scored at the start of the league campaign this season. We don't have a recognised top-class striker. We don't create bags of chances. And if we do, we concede loads of chances at the same time. So even if we did have a top-class striker, we don't create chances and keep it tight at the other end. The season where we did all right and we finished third was Rashford scoring 30 goals. The team itself didn't score that many goals that season, but he hit a hot streak and scored 30. Probably played a massive part in why we did so well that season and finished so high. But that's a 1 in 5 season job. It's we're going to wait for that to happen again. Who else has got that capacity to do that? And he's not going to do it at the moment. So it's a really big concern, scoring goals. And just finally, obviously Ten Hag's going to be in charge for the foreseeable future. I think it's a really, really difficult position for the club now, because even if you brought Van Nistelrooy in, the longer it takes to do that, the less of the season there is to salvage, the more the players are building up some familiarity breeds contempt type stuff with Van Nistelrooy as well as Ten Hag, because he's there training every day. Maybe they love Van Nistelrooy and don't like Ten Hag, I don't know, but the impact he can have if the season's dead in the water in 2 months' time or a month's time or whenever is less, of course. And I'm not sure that familiarity of Van Nistelrooy helps his cause to then come in and be an interim. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The other thing you've got to ask yourself then from a club's perspective with Van Nistelrooy and the fella from Go Ahead Eagles, who probably would be his assistant, is, have you just brought these in because there'll be a decent interim manager and assistant manager? Because that's kind of what it looks like. Because if it's for any other longer term purpose, then if they become interim manager and interim assistant manager until the end of the season, unless they absolutely do something outrageous and get it full time, they're both leaving at the end of the season. You only got them in this summer. So if you only got them in for that purpose, that's what I'd be wondering. Maybe they have. In which case that makes sense. But otherwise, they're two weird appointments. Because if they're going to be interim manager and his interim assistant manager, then probably when someone else comes in, those two are going to go, aren't they? Maybe the club are counting on Van Nistelrooy doing well enough to get interest from other people so he could leave and they not have to pay him off at the end of his interim spell, but not that well where they have to give him the job. I don't know. There's no perfect solution, and I'm aware of that, but it comes back to the same thing I've said before. They should have done it in the summer. They should have pulled the plug in the summer when they didn't want him. And the reason they couldn't do that is because they hadn't done the homework in terms of coming up with a decent replacement. So it's on INEOS. They've messed that up royally, and the knock-on effect of that now is what we're seeing. So it's not a good start by them. And as I said, to bring it back to what I spoke about at the start, not got a problem with Ferguson leaving his role. Makes sense. Not got a problem if you need to let go of 250 staff because it's going to save money. Makes sense. But you can't just have those standards with the little people and the old guy. You've got to also do it with the big hitters in the squad. If you're gonna use that common sense approach, which it is, well then relate that and transfer that to the first team squad, where there's at least two players that I've highlighted there who are stealing a very, 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 very expensive living. Glazers out.